Witness what it's like to be a non-binary pregnant person and then a parent. Hello and welcome back to I'm the Zaddy. Thank you for joining me again. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about picking a donor, what IUI treatment actually felt like for me, and how after 6 rounds of IUI, we ended up getting pregnant. This is the point where it stopped being a plan and it had gone from something that we've talked about for years into something that was actually happening in our life. It wasn't hypothetical anymore. There was no more maybe one days. We were in it. So first things first, picking a donor. This is the part that everyone asks about. There's always so much curiosity around it and a fascination with how it all works, like how do you choose? Is it awkward? Is it like online shopping? Is it Amazon for sperm? I think that there's an assumption based on what people have seen on TV that it's like flipping through some sort of Argos catalogue for sperm and just casually browsing, picking eye colour and hair type, making it feel like a weird Build-A-Bear but for a baby. And I hate to break it to you, there is no laminated book of sperm, not in the UK anyway, not in our experience anyway. So in reality, it's not like that at all. But because we were funded by the NHS, we got sent a few links from the clinic for us to look at and choose from. They were like pre-authorised banks, and they were all over the world. And really quickly, you realise that it's not like shopping. It's not like picking a new jumper or a new pair of shoes. It's a massive decision, and it's kind of clinical in a way. It's done through approved donor bank platforms and with more information than you can ever imagine. And yeah, you are given profiles, and yes, you can see physical characteristics because some of them give you pictures of what they look like as a child. You never see the donor as an adult, not on the sites that we were given anyway. But we had access to like their medical history, their genetic history, their family history, their education, their interests, and some of their sites even show like a bit of their personality because some of the donors choose to write letters or record messages to you and their future donor offspring. And I guess that, for me, that's where it started to feel like it wasn't data or facts anymore. I heard their voices and I read their letters and it made them human, and it hit me in a way that I wasn't really prepared for. I started to imagine who they were in the real world and not just in the donor context, like as a real person who exists that has a life. Donors, they are real people. They have chosen to share their DNA with anybody that needs or wants it. And most of them that we found, they feel so altruistic about it. And it changed the way we were looking at them. It shifted what we were focusing on. Because ultimately, you're not just picking from a list of people. You are not just picking details that you like about them. You are picking half of your future child, someone that you'll never meet. You will never meet that donor, but they will always be part of your child's story. And ultimately, there'll be someone that you tell your child about when they're old enough to understand. Well, we will anyway. When we started looking, we actually started with personality. We wanted someone funny, and that mattered to us. The idea of humour as part of our child's DNA was important. And we actually found someone that felt really right. And then the motility wasn't. And honestly, we were gutted. And it felt like we had to start all over again. But logically, it's just data. But emotionally, it felt like a bit of a loss, like we were having to start again. But it did help us focus in on the health aspect and picking genetics instead. So it made sense to focus on the donor health and the family history to give us the best chance, but also to give our future child the healthiest genes that we could. And when it comes to IUI, motility really matters. And as you're going through the sort of picking the donor, you realise how much that matters. Because when you view the donors, their sperm is actually ranked in terms of motility. And that rank tells you what fertility treatment it can be used for. So for us going into IUI, we needed the best swimmers because IUI is the closest thing that we were going to get to natural. So they needed to be fast, strong swimmers. So then Because the donor sperm is ranked, it automatically removes a lot of options, which does help because more options is often too overwhelming. We actually found ourselves leaning more towards Scandinavian donors, partly because we love the idea of having a tiny Viking, but they seem the most real and altruistic donors. Their mentality around being a donor is honestly amazing, and even had me having the conversation with my partner about maybe donating my eggs after having our child to see if anybody else could be using them. Culturally, the donation in Scandinavia, it just seems different. It seems open and accepted and seen as normal. And something about that feels really reassuring. There was something about choosing from a place where it's seen as something so positive and so generous felt really, really good. It felt comforting, and I felt a sense of trust, and seeing my values reflecting back at me from a person I'd never met was such a vibe that felt so good. But we didn't choose quickly. We went around the houses, backwards and forwards, second guessing, revisiting, and ultimately overthinking and underthinking, and kind of, how do we judge this? How do we decide? And there's no perfect answer. There's no perfect donor. It's just a decision that ultimately you have to be ready to stand by. And eventually we chose, not because it felt perfect, but because it felt right enough. And the donor we chose felt right. So if I go back to Christmas 2024, I had my last test, the Hycosi, which I mentioned in episode 2. And honestly, it messed me up for about 3 weeks. Physically, emotionally, hormonally. And it was really unpleasant and uncomfortable and made me feel really feminine, as I'd never really suffered from PMS or any sort of womb issues. So I was already feeling discomfort about having to acknowledge constantly the way that my body felt after having the Hycosi. It was a challenge to understand what was happening because there were all these symptoms that I didn't really understand and hadn't really had before. So I visited the GP and I ended up seeing a nurse who basically gave me an STI test where she actually treated me pretty bad. She was really judgmental and asked me loads of what felt like really offensive questions and kind of treated me as dirty. And I knew for a fact that I hadn't had any kind of infection, but that the Hycosi had upset my system, but no one seemed to be listening. And I never got a call about the test results. I had to look it up on the app to see what happened. No one checked in with me and no one helped. I basically self-medicated by using pH balancers, and they were pretty awful to use, to be honest, because it was a pessary, which made me really aware of my body, and it was a little bit uncomfortable. And it made me kind of realise that women's health isn't understood. Now, I might be sort of what feels like new to that in a way, but it felt really judgmental and not helpful, and it felt uncomfortable for me being in that box, even though I don't see myself as a woman. But I was receiving care as a woman, and it made me feel quite alone and also worried about what it would mean moving forward in the pregnancy. It took around 3 weeks for my system to actually settle down, and Christmas and New Year came and went, and January was here. And I was back to eating well and swimming and looking after my body, because at this point I was feeling the pressure of getting ready to go into the first round of IUI. We'd been tracking ovulation, not because we were trying, but because I wanted to understand what my body was doing and when it was doing it, because I had no frame of reference as to whether I was actually ovulating each month. Some people don't. Some people ovulate every few months, every couple of months. So I kind of wanted to understand where my body was at and what it was doing. So we were using the Clear Blue ovulation test, the digital ones, the ones with little smiley faces on them that tell you whether you're ovulating or not. The clinic actually recommended these ones as the most reliable. The tests themselves were really easy to use, except the length of time that we used them for. The digital part of the kit kept dying and we kept having to replace it. And let me tell you, they're not cheap. What I didn't love about these tests was the language that was used on the bottom of the leaflet. I get it, mostly heterosexual people use these, but it would be simple enough to make the language non-gendered, to make people like me feel more comfortable in using them, because it can't just be me that finds them weird. It made me feel like I shouldn't be using them, like they weren't built for me to use them. They made me feel like I was on the outside, like I really didn't fit the idea of what society's view of a parent was. And I tried not to linger on it too much and just know that the tests were doing what we needed them to do. And again, I guess I assumed the role of patient in those moments. Again, not to kind of disconnect, but to make myself comfortable using a product that felt like it wasn't for me. And that was a really strange feeling, especially when you're peeing in a cup at 7 in the morning and trying to work out whether you might ovulate that day, whether it's going to be a phone call to the clinic or not. Also, a little side note, I am definitely a pee in the cup person, not a pee on the stick person. I don't know what that says about me, but there it is. The tracking of my ovulation actually really helped. It helped me gain some structure around something that I had what felt like no control over. It gave me a reference for what was happening inside my body when I had no information about it. So eventually we kind of worked out that my cycle had settled down and I would ovulate on day 12 and we generally have IUI on day 13 and my body found its own rhythm, and I can only assume that other people's does too. I've learned that rhythm changes, like some people, like I said, will ovulate once a month, once every couple of months. Some people go months without ovulating. But I began to feel really nervous about absolutely everything. I was nervous about my weight, my diet, my stress levels, especially work stress. Work stress was bogging me down. Illness was bogging me down. I was really ill and I felt that I was failing. Felt like I wasn't doing enough to relax myself and keep calm. And then that was an added pressure to keep calm. And it was me adding the pressure in. And I was having to remind myself to sort of bring myself back down and make sure that the work stress wasn't getting too much and making sure that I was eating the right things to stave off the illness. And my hormones were all over the place. And ahead of all of this, way before I started IUI, way before we switched, I'd actually come off my antidepressants and had stopped smoking as well. I didn't come off my antidepressants because I had to, but because I wanted to. You don't have to come off them in order to get pregnant, but it's always a toss-up as to what's better for you, what's better for the baby, what's better for your system. You never know quite how you're going to feel when you come off antidepressants, how you will deal with things in life, but it felt like the right decision for me. So I did it. And I think that going through this process unmedicated in that way was even more of a challenge. So eventually, after all the tracking and everything, we moved forwards with our very first IUI treatment. We booked our first scan where you go in for a day 10 scan. So you've done the tracking and you've got the little smiley face and it's like, hey, you're going into your fertile window, and at that point they want to see you and see how big the follicle is, whereabouts you're at, so they can sort of plot it out. When we went in for the scan, the follicle was way too small. So we waited, we tracked again, and then we were booked in a few days later. And honestly, when we walked in for the scan after the 10-day scan, we were expecting nothing. I'd kind of already, again, written it off. I lay down on the bed without pants on, and the nurse lubed up the wand and cracked on. And there it was, the first fat follicle. So we moved forward with our very first IUI treatment. We actually ended up using what they call a trigger shot to time everything precisely. So you use the trigger shot 24 to 36 hours before IUI treatment when the follicle has got to around 17 mil. And this kind of helps get everything aligned so that when you get into the room to have the sperm placed into your uterus, your egg is already there waiting because the trigger shot has created that chemical reaction for you. Walking into the clinic was nerve-wracking. We'd been there before, many, many times, with different scans and different appointments and things like that. But when you go for IUI, it's a different waiting room, and my bladder was so full because it has to be full in order to have IUI. So I was nervous and uncomfortable. So we went into the little waiting room, and then we got called through. We got like a little booth that was surrounded by that, that weird blue folded privacy screen that's not really private because everyone can hear everything. But the nurse told us what was about to happen. She explained and told me to put a gown on and a hairnet, take everything off except my socks and my bra. And my partner was told to basically take everything off and put scrubs on. So we did that and we waited. So during that time, you never know how long it's going to take, because if you're the first one in the queue that day, then it's fairly quick. But if you're not, then you're kind of having this balancing act between, oh, my bladder's really full, oh, I need to empty it a bit, oh, I kind of need to drink some more water. So the wait felt like forever because I needed a wee. But I genuinely became the master of just letting a little bit out, just enough so that we could go ahead with IUI. The gown felt so clinical, and the hairnet. Anyone that knows me in real life, I have a lot of hair, so I put this hairnet on and my hair was just falling out all over the shop, and it was just a bit of a sensory overload. But the room itself, it was pretty chill, you know. I'd probably say there was like 3 or 4 other booths, other people waiting for IUI, and some other ones with recovering ladies who had just clearly had egg retrieval for IVF. So it was quiet and there was whispering. And again, if you know me personally, I find it really tricky to whisper. So that became a skill that I learned through IUI. We eventually got called in, and you know, you have the obligatory, how are you doing, what are you up to this weekend, that kind of chit chat to make the whole thing feel somewhat normal. It's definitely not normal. It's such a weird alien feeling to kind of be dressed up and go into a room and have someone basically put sperm in your uterus. But the first time going in, we had no idea what to expect, and I sat on the bed, my partner sat next to the bed, and they go through all your details, they check your names, match the names on the sperm vial, obviously to make sure that that's the one that belongs to you. So then I was like laid back and my legs end up in stirrups. They use a sheet to kind of make you feel less on show, which did make me feel better, because I'd kind of got this picture in my head that I would be legs akimbo, everything out for everybody to see. And the doctor literally sat between my legs, prepped me, not using lube, because apparently sperm doesn't like lube. Who knew? And then they use basically a speculum and push a catheter right up into your uterus, get it in position, and then when everything's good, they push the sperm in. So for them, it's quick, it's routine, they have the process nailed. But for us, you sat there or you're lying there and it could be life-changing, and you hope it is. And each time you finish, you get up and they go, good luck, I hope it works this time. And everybody's usually really positive and hopeful. And you walk out and that's it. So once the sperm was in and we left the room, literally it's just a 2-week wait. The dreaded 2-week wait. The first 2-week wait was awful, because we were in this limbo space of not knowing, and that meant we didn't really know how to feel, and both hoping and wishing. But I was overthinking everything, overfeeling everything. I was kind of hoping what the things that I was experiencing was sort of conception, and was at the moment things happened. And I overanalyzed everything, every feeling, every symptom. Do I feel sick? Do I not? Do I feel off? Do I not? Is it all in my head? So many times I spiraled and talked it out with my partner during that first 2-week wait, and it just felt like forever. I think definitely for me, I was telling myself not to get my hopes up, but then I couldn't stop myself from hoping and asking what if. I was waiting to see if I bled, and the longer you don't bleed for, the more silently excited I got. But I tried to contain myself so that I wasn't devastated if it was negative. It's such a weird thing to hold both things at the same time. But eventually the 2 weeks were finally up. I hadn't bled, so I was sort of hopeful but realistic. The stats on people getting pregnant the first time are really low. So got up out of bed and used the first wee of the day. And then it's a 2-minute wait. And that 2-minute wait also feels like forever. And you don't want to walk away, but you don't want to stand and stare at it. But you also kind of want to just get it over and done with. And again, we used Clear Blue as they were deemed the most reliable by the clinic and by Google. But the first IUI didn't work and the test was negative. So we started again. And it felt like we had no time to recover or accept or grieve the loss of the first try. It felt like we barely got time to breathe in between, because ultimately then you kind of go from that and then you bleed, you have your period, and so the cycle starts all over again. We had to tell the clinic straight away. They apologised to us about it being negative and encouraged us by saying, next time, and you still got this many tries. But it's hard to hear right after a negative test because you put so much hope into that test that you're still trying to deal with the negative, but then you're having to do the practical, and then the cycle has started again, and you've bled and you've tracked ovulation and you've had the day 10 scan and you're in the same room, the same process and the same hope, and it feels endless. And the second and third cycles were similar. One of them we used the trigger, and one was completely natural without any assistance. And the fourth one, I was actually advised to inject myself with Meriofert to help my follicle grow and help the egg reach its full maturity, ready for IUI. And that meant that we had a sharps box in the house. My partner was injecting me every night at the same time before bed, and that was when I learned that she really disliked needles, but she did it anyway. But we kept getting negative tests, and I was getting disheartened because we were running out of cycles and sperm. And with each round, I stayed hopeful, but with each negative test, I felt more and more like I was failing, like my body wasn't doing what we needed it to do. And that pressure was mounting with each one, which obviously then didn't help. The fifth cycle was fully medicated. So this one meant that I was having the Meriofert jabs beforehand to help the follicle and the egg mature. Then I was having the trigger to make the ovulation predictable. And then on top of that, I was prescribed progesterone pessaries to take after IUI had happened to sustain any pregnancy. At this point, my body and my hormones were all over the shop. This was the most hormonal part of this experience because I genuinely felt like I was going through puberty all over again. I had never felt hormones like this, and it really made me wonder about how me not experiencing these very female hormones reflected my gender and the way that I feel about my body. I genuinely thought I was going mental, like I was losing my mind, like I was having a breakdown every few days, and I would talk to my partner and she'd be like, yeah, this is how I feel a few days a month. I'd be like, how do you deal with that? Like, how is that something that's okay, like, for people to experience every single month? Absolutely wild. And I genuinely think that this gets so overlooked in health institutions and in work situations. Like, how can you go about your work day in experiencing all this stuff and be expected to perform just like everybody else? Honestly, absolutely mental. But it turns out that the fifth one was also negative too. So after all that medication and the enormous hormone roller coaster I had been on, the negative test was genuinely devastating because I had even more hope that I would get pregnant because of all the assistance my body was getting and because of sort of the build-up of hormones over the treatments. But in between the negative test and the next IUI, we'd actually stopped to think about what we wanted to do because it was coming up to Christmas again and we'd got one round of IUI left. Did we want to have the sixth one and see if it would take, or wait and give ourselves a break from the mental torture? Logically, for me, it felt that my body had so many hormones pumped in that it felt like we should carry on because it felt like I was in a much better hormonal position to continue instead of breaking the hormone cycle. Because if it was genuinely the hormones that were going to help me, it felt logical to carry on going. But we were both tired. I was tired of the drugs and the chemicals, the jabs, the scans, the pessaries, of all of it. But we decided to have one last go before Christmas. But we had already written it off as we were feeling pretty negative about it working. We'd kind of already planned a break for over Christmas, thinking that it wasn't going to work. We'll have the break over Christmas and we'll start again in the new year at some point, where we then take on the challenge of IVF, where it would be even more invasive for me. The same sort of jab, so Meriofert the same, but a much higher dose, and then obviously egg retrieval and things like that. But that final IUI was interesting for a few reasons. We got to the clinic as usual. Apart from being early, now anybody knows us in our personal life, we're not early to anything. We are generally late to absolutely everything. But anyway, we got to the clinic, the same waiting room, full bladder, gowns and scrubs on, and the nurse came through and asked us if we would be okay for a trainee to scan my uterus at the same time as the procedure would happen. That meant that there was going to be more people in the room, but IUI would happen as normal. There would be a screen with an ultrasound would be on my stomach to watch the catheter and the sperm being deposited. We agreed, like, why not? It would be interesting at least to sort of watch the process happen in real time. And watching it felt fascinating. We literally watched the sperm get deposited and go on their way to my egg. And it was something else. And looking back on it now was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, who else can say that they watched that happen? Then it was all done and we left as normal. Good luck, you know, all the usual. And during then the 2-week wait after that, I got really, really ill. I was really stressed and I was exhausted, and we had written it off. We'd written it off before we'd gone even into it, and I think once I'd got ill, we both just kind of wrote it off again completely. So 2 weeks later, we didn't want to test. We were both lying in bed and putting off getting out of bed because it would mean doing the test, because obviously that first morning wee is the best one to use. And you know, whilst you haven't tested, there's still that tiny little bit of hope. But eventually we got up and we both looked at each other and knew it was sort of time. I was going into it expecting negative. We've been so ill and so stressed. And as normal, I peed in the cup that's lovingly called the piss cup. And my partner dipped the test in and placed it on the side. She turned round and we just hugged. We were genuinely grieving before even knowing what the result was. We'd written it off because we'd gone, okay, this is our IUI journey done, and you know, we're going to have to go into IVF, and not sure how that's going to work for us and how that's going to look. Then I looked at the test and I literally gasped out loud, like a comic book gasp, and fell to my knees, and my partner just started crying. And we had one other test in the house, you know, one of those digital ones that you get as like a secondary test, the ones that tell you how far pregnant you are, like 1 to 2 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks or whatever. So we did that one too, and that said 2 to 3 weeks pregnant. Both tests were positive, and all I kept asking was how can that be? How does this happen? What? I don't understand. Like, I'm really ill, I'm really stressed. How has this happened? Obviously we know how this has happened. I had IUI 2 weeks ago. We watched it happen. So yeah, but there it was. I was pregnant. And we were completely overjoyed, but I still didn't believe it. And we immediately got dressed and went to Asda and bought 4 more tests and did them all. We bought a variation in costs and quality because I was like, right, we'll just get a few of each, see what happens. They were all pregnant. I did like 6 or 7 tests and they were all pregnant. And I think the thing about this whole process is that it doesn't follow a straight line. It doesn't happen the way you expect. It's messy and emotional and extremely physical in my case, and probably in others too. So please, like, if you have a similar experience, please share it with me, because it's been so much, and a lot of the time we're just figuring it out as we went along. But there it was, pregnant. So that brings this episode to a close, and if you'd like to share your IUI or IVF journey with me, I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can email me at getintouch@imthezaddy.com or follow me on Instagram at imthezaddy.pod. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me next time. Peace.